If you do research on Magic's first set alpha, you'd find a ton of articles about its limited printing, product openings, and of course, its insane financial value. But no one really talks about what made Alpha immortal. Alpha had lore. And there was one crucial decision during Alpha's production made by Richard Garfield that transformed Magic from a generic card game into the trading card game with the greatest world building and storytelling in history. Richard realized if you name the cards, you name the world. What is up, everyone? I'm Rusty, your local laboratory maniac, and this is Labman's Lore, where I connect you to your cards through story. And today we're talking about Magic's first set, Alpha, and how Alpha contained the DNA to the entire multiverse. Let's keep that 90s feeling going. You're at Gen Con 1993. It was the gathering place for anyone who wanted to try out brand new tabletop games. Alpha Set is first sold here and actually sells out completely. But as people cracked packs, there were Magic cards that predated even these cards, called playtest cards, that showed the effectiveness of his naming strategy for world building, giving us a contrast into a possible alternate future for Magic. There were actually multiple iterations of Magic's playtest cards, and looking at this first version, you could probably already tell what it would eventually become. It's titled Angel, a simple name, flying, 4 power. Just another fantasy creature. But over time, the card evolved. It gained toughness, it became more defined, different mana cost, but eventually it gained a name we still recognize over 30 years later, Serra Angel. And that's the key to it all, that single change before the final printing. Richard Garfield didn't just give these cards mechanics, he gave them identity. Because once a card has a name like Sarah, it implies a history, a character, a whole world. And decades later, Magic is still building on that foundation. There are still cards referring to Sarah to this very day. Alongside alpha booster packs and starter decks, Wizards released a rulebook for the game, but it didn't just contain rules, it also contained the vision of Richard Garfield for this world, and it contained the first story ever told in Magic history. On page 4, there's a story titled Rorica's Tale, and hidden inside this short story are the first planeswalkers ever described in Magic history, Worzel and Thomil. The two battle each other in a way that feels shockingly similar to an actual game of Magic, revealing the kind of vision Richard Garfield had already in the game, even during Alpha Set. The story takes place on the plane of Ergamon, a world of endless vistas, ancient ruins, and uncivilized cultures. The story isn't even told from the perspective of these planeswalkers. It's told from the eyes of Worzel's animal companion, Rorica, much like your commander probably sees you in a game of EDH. Worzel is a planeswalker, a mage who draws power from the land itself. She's doing research when one of her magical wards warn her a hostile planeswalker is nearby, right on the other side of the mountain range, in fact. But it isn't just any planeswalker, it's an old enemy of hers, Thomil. Worzel reacts instinctively like every Magic player does, and reaches out to the land for mana. She remembers their last fight. He used destructive fire magic, but this time she's prepared for his little tricks. She senses him on the other side of the mountain range. She calls on green mana to send out scribe sprites and grizzly bears, and then calls on red mana to create a lightning storm for cover. But then something goes wrong. The bears aren't dying from fire like she expected. They are being torn apart limb from limb by a horde of the undead. A sudden chill goes down her spine. Thomil has learned black magic. This disgusts her. It is the dirtiest type of magic to her. Death, necromancy, corruption. She is dealing with a more dangerous enemy than before. She must adapt. Then she feels it. A massive pool of mana. Thomil was summoning something ancient. Something that should not exist on this plane. She tries to gather her defenses, but before she can react, a demonic shadow crests the mountains, blotting out the sun. A demon so iconic, players still recognize it 30 years later, a Lord of the Pit. The demon consumes the sprites with death magic, then it turns to Worzel. She knows she cannot fight this thing head on. She does something extremely common in the Alpha era. She casts a Circle of Protection Black. And it works. The demon can't reach her. It circles its prey and waits, but it gets bored and eventually goes back on its summoner, Thomil. Demons and magic aren't free. They demand payment for their power they promise, their pound of flesh. Since Lord of the Pit was denied Worzel's, it wants its flesh from Thomil. And then silence. Worzel searches for the enemy planeswalker, but all she finds is a crater where he once stood. She shrugs and carries on with her business. It was just another day in the life of a planeswalker. I love this short story. It shows what Richard Garfield pictured from day one. When you sit across the table from an opponent, whether it's at a tournament or with friends in a pod of EDH, that's what you are, planeswalkers, summoning creatures, casting spells. Whether you win or lose doesn't really matter. You'll shuffle up your cards and do it again. Just another day in the life of a planeswalker. And one crazy aspect of this is that Worzel and Thomil still don't have cards to this day. In fact, they were only mentioned a couple times in Magic after that, specifically on the flavor text of Segovian Angel, which states, when Worzel summoned Segovian Angels to fight Thomil's Garganticari Gnats, the ensuing battle numbered among the multiverse's least destructive. The world Richard built didn't stop with fiction. It turned real matches into lore, and at Gen Con 93, Magic had its first major tournament. Imagine it, two players battling it out, in what would become a legendary match between planeswalkers. You've all been to tournaments before, the excitement of the unknown, people surrounding them watching, silently rooting for their friend to win. The players were Rick Townsend and Alex Parrish. Now, Richard Garfield wrote a story version of this exact match, not because the cards needed more lore, but because Richard believed that the players themselves were part of the story. In the story, Rick becomes a planeswalker named Anton, and Alex becomes a planeswalker named Karshan. The story starts off with Anton awakening, exhausted. He remembers his last opponent, a brutal planeswalker who fled into the mountains. Anton steps outside his cozy little cottage. He sees in the distance the Kai Karen Mountains, glowing with an eerie red light. A warning, and then lightning strikes. From the mountains, a goblin raiding party advances towards him. And they aren't just some random goblins. They carry the banner of their master, Karshan. Anton reaches out to the land behind him, the Grand Plains. He pulls mana, and as the goblins charge, he casts a Circle of Protection Red. The goblins recoil, but then their eyes burn with hate, and they attack anyway. Karshan pushes forward. More goblins swarm through the swamplands. Anton draws from the forest. He tries to stabilize. He tries to survive. But Karshan isn't here just to trade blows. Karshan is here to end the duel. Stone rains from the sky. The forest is pelted and destroyed. The goblins attack again. Anton reaches out to the land once more, praying his protection will hold. But then Karshan summons something unstoppable, a hulking artifact, a machine that does not feel fear, and a creature that does not stop. It's a juggernaut. The goblin attacks once again, but the circle repels them. So Anton calls on the forest to help. A giant spider answers. For a moment, Anton might stabilize, but then a bolt of lightning hits the spider, killing it and all the hopes he had. Now it's Anton versus the Juggernaut. Desperate, Anton tries summoning a creature, but it's all in vain. The Juggernaut slams into Anton. The Planeswalker collapses, and in defeat, he vows that one day he will return and face Karshan yet again. Garfield wrote it as a myth, a legend, and to me, that's the exact moment Magic stopped being a card game and totally manifested as his vision. Mechanics functioning in harmony as a story engine. And here is a play-by-play of the game, so you can put the story to paper. So now that we've seen two things, Alpha had official stories, and it turned matches into lore, but the biggest world building tool in all of Magic were the cards themselves. Alpha's flavor text, card names, and art quietly build locations, races, and named characters. So now, let's talk about the world hidden inside Alpha cards. Dominia is one of the earliest terms for what we now call the multiverse. It's referenced in the flavor text of Demonic Horde, which states, created to destroy Dominia, demons can sometimes be bent to a more focused purpose. Although referencing the multiverse, most of the cards were later shifted to being on the plane of Dominaria. Alpha references demons constantly, and later Magic would expand this into the concept of the Abyss, a place of oblivion, madness, and demonic horror. Associated with the concept of hell referenced on the Wall of Fire's flavor text, Abyss isn't an afterlife, however, and it has the location within it called the Pit, referenced as mentioned in the Lord of the Pit. It is also highly aligned with black and red mana. Llanowar is one of Magic's most iconic early locations, a vast forest, elven tribes, and green mana so dense it feels alive. And it begins right here in Alpha with Llanowar Elves. Its ability to tap for mana shows green's connection to life energy. Shiv might be the most famous red location on Dominaria, a volcanic region overflowing with red mana. Dragons roost here, and the most iconic of them all appears on Shivan Dragon. Its flavor text speaks to the nature of these particular dragons, stating, while it's true most dragons are cruel, the Shivan Dragon seems to take particular glee in the misery of others, often tormenting its victims much like a cat plays with a mouse before delivering the final blow. Benalia is one of Dominaria's greatest human nations, a white-aligned military culture, knights, faith, order, and it all begins in Alpha with Benalish Hero. Its ability shows that the humans work together and band together to take on larger threats of the plane. Vesuva is a blue-aligned island full of mystery and shapeshifters. You never know who you are talking to, what their intentions are, but you just know it's not what it appears. Vesuva Doppelganger shows us that the inhabitants have the ability to mimic others easily. On the text of the land Vesuva, the flavor text states, it's everything and nothing all in one. Now we're getting to one of my favorite parts, because Alpha planted character seeds in the minds of players, some that Wizards would take 30 years to fully develop. And if you're a deck builder, pay close attention. Some of these characters make great inspirations for deck themes. Urza is first referenced in Alpha in Glasses of Urza and Sunglasses of Urza. He, of course, will become the main character of Magic the Gathering, and a planeswalker, but in this time, he's not referenced in any other thing other than, I guess he has bad vision, but that's about it. And remember, he wouldn't even exist as a character if it wasn't for Richard Garfield adding one little name in front of glasses or sunglasses. Now later in 2019, he'd have his own Magic the Gathering card finally. Kind of crazy that we waited so long, but better late than never. You'll see this is actually a trend for all these characters. Mishra, Urza's brother, is first referenced in Anarch of Mishra. This Anarch and those classes would lead to one of the most popular and most devastating storylines in Magic lore. Two brothers, two ideologies, one war, the Brothers' War, which I will cover a military analysis of that in a future video. He'd get a card in 2013, 6 years later before his brother, and I'm sure Mishra would chuckle at that fact. Gaia is first referenced in Gaia's Liege. She's the world soul of Dominaria, the living essence of a plane, and this establishes something later on. Planes aren't just settings and locations. They can be alive, and if needed, they can fight with avatars. I actually talk about this in my multiverse video, check that out. Although she has over 20 cards referencing her, she doesn't have a card quite yet. A lot of avatars though. Still, some alpha lore that can be explored. Serra is referenced in the most iconic angel in Magic, Serra Angel, and Serra becomes one of Magic's most beloved early planeswalkers. While most were seen as selfish and powerful gods, she was different. As her angels indicate, she is a creator, a protector, and someone whose story ends tragically. She gets a card eventually in Modern Horizons in 2019. Referenced in Navinaral's disc, he is a Lich Lord of Orborg and the author of the Necromancer's Handbook, basically the textbook of necromancy and magic lore. Even Liliana respects his power. He'd eventually get a card in 2020 in Commander Legends. Okay, this next one is hard to pronounce. I call her Asmore. If you can say her full name on the first try, comment down below. You're just built different and I respect it. She's referenced in Granite Gargoyle's flavor text, and later she will get her card in Modern Horizons. Do you notice a theme here? And she's basically a chef for demons who cooks for the Lord of the Pit, which is pretty metal. Between her cookbook and Navinaral's textbook of necromancy, we're starting to have quite the library here. Norn is referenced in the flavor text of Jade's statue that states, "Some of the other guys dared me to touch it, but I know it weren't no ordinary hunk of rock." Now, of course, you see that in a crypt, do not touch that creepy thing, okay? You'll definitely get cursed. He was right on the money. He would not get his own card until 13 years later. But his story is kind of interesting. He gets put into a time rift, comes back, instantly goes into Duskmoor, which is also just a scary movie playing. So this guy literally can't take a break, and he's more cowardly than Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Alpha was the first set, but it was also the first story in Magic. Many focus on other aspects of the set, but it built the foundations to worlds that are still being fleshed out to this day. If you want to understand modern Magic story, you need to first understand this story. And remember, every time you shuffle up and play, you're stepping into a brand new story. This was just the first world in my Forgotten Lore series. In my next video, we will travel to the world of Arabia in 1001 Nights, where a desert-covered planet holds many mysteries for us planeswalkers to discover. I even have talked to a professor in ancient Arabian literature to help us uncover some of the mysteries of Arabian Nights. And I bet I know what you're thinking. I left some stuff out in this video. But next week, I will release a video with 25 things you didn't know about Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited lore. It will have some interesting facts that don't really fit into this storytelling format. Thanks so much for watching till the end of the video. Quick shout out to my paid patrons, Brooke, Brody, Who's New, Gutari, and Chris. I appreciate your support. Check out my Patreon, my Discord, and my YouTube channel that focuses on unique EDH deck builds. Links will all be down below. Again, I'm Rusty, your local laboratory maniac and guide to the multiverse. Until next time.